If you've ever heat pressed a patch and it just looked cheap, or the edges started peeling, or it just fell off completely, it's probably not the patch itself. It's how you pressed it. Today I'm going to be walking through exactly how I heat press patches so that they look professional, they actually stick, and they're not going to fall off later. Since I started my print shop, I've done a ton of heat press patches on shirts, hoodies, sweaters, hats, you name it. I've done it and I've failed at it. But through that process, I learned that small mistakes can lead to big problems. So let's walk through some of the common fails and fixes together and see if we can't get your heat press patches to stick for good. Today I've got two different sweaters that I'm going to be working on, so you'll see some examples of both of those. But let's get over the press so you can see what actually matters. The most common problem I had early on and that I see a lot of beginners make is temperature. If your press is too cold, your patch isn't going to stick. And if it's too hot, then you're going to scorch the patch or the garment, or you're going to just burn the adhesive right off. The sweaters I'm pressing today are a cotton poly blend, which means I'm going to have my heat press a little bit on the lower side. So normally for a 100% cotton garment, I'd keep my heat press at about 320 to 340 depending on the thickness of the patch and of the garment. But since it's a cotton poly blend, we're going to keep the heat press a lot lower and do about 315. If it was a thinner garment or if the poly count was a lot higher, then I'd stay at 310 at the max and probably around 300 degrees. But it's always better to start low and get hotter if you need to. Really, the pressure is going to matter a lot more than the temperature at this point, but you don't want to be too hot depending on the fabric in that garment. Polyester is a lot easier to burn than cotton is. So it's very, very important that you don't crank that press up really hot and that you don't put the pressure down too extreme. So for this cotton poly blended material, I'm going to keep my heat press, like I said, at 315. I'm going to use medium to firm pressure, and I'm going to keep that down for about 10 to 15 seconds. We'll go 15 seconds on the high end because pressure is a good thing here. Always do an initial pre-press also. That's going to remove all the moisture from the garment and make sure that the adhesive on the patch is ready to go and that the fabric in the garment is ready to receive that patch. For the pre-press, I do anything between 5 to 10 seconds, just enough to get that steam started, and that's when you know that the moisture is leaving the garment. Now, I know a lot of people call these iron-on patches, but be careful, because a lot of times hand pressing isn't going to get the right amount of pressure and the even amount of pressure that you need to make sure that these patches are going to stick long term. Heat without pressure does nothing. The pressure has to be perfect, it has to be even, and it has to be consistent across the whole entire patch at all times so that this works the right way. A really awesome tool that you can use is called a pressing pillow. Pressing pillows really help when you're trying to get good, even adhesion. So if you're having issues with the corners peeling or with parts of your patch not sticking, try one of these pressing pillows. It might be the solution to your problem. Uneven pressure, uneven heat is your worst enemy when it comes to heat press patches. That's when the edges start lifting, and that's when it goes bad really fast. Another big reason why your patches may come out looking kind of cheap is placement. It'll look perfect on the heat press, and then when you put it on, it's all off. Centered on the table is not the same as centered on a body. Remember, you are placing for a person, not for a flat table. That means you always want to reference the garment for what's center, not the heat press platen. A pro tip is to fold the garment in half completely and do a small little pre-press so that you get a nice little creased line right in the center of that garment. Vertical placement is where a lot of beginners mess up. If it's too high, it looks like a sticker. If it's too low, it looks like it was an afterthought. A general rule for sweaters and shirts and hoodies is 2 to 3 inches below the collar. For patches like letters, it's going to be even lower than that to make it look more premium. One thing I'd suggest is to step back, take a look at your work, make sure everything's lined up the way you want it before pressing that first time. Because once it's set and it's pressed, it's stuck. There's nothing you can do about that. If it feels slightly off while on the platen, it probably is, and that's going to look even worse when somebody's wearing it. Also, consider the garment and the type of material you're pressing on. Sweaters are going to stretch, ribbing is going to pull designs visually downward, and thicker garments are going to exaggerate placement mistakes. So please make sure you've got your alignment perfect before that first press. If you've ever had a heat press patch fall off or look crooked, it's not because you're bad at this. Most failures come from the small things that nobody ever explains. Once you know what to look for, it becomes a lot easier to build confidence, to get the patches right every time, and then it becomes easy. Most heat-activated products are going to follow these exact same rules of heat, pressure, and patience. That's why getting this part right matters. Okay, so we did our pre-press, we made sure everything was aligned perfect, and we did our full first press. Now we checked our edges, make sure that they're adhering well. Now it's time for the double press. This is what saves the patch and locks it in for life. If you have patches that are lifting after you wash it once or twice, it's probably because you skipped the double press process. The first press is the bond, and a lot of people think that's good enough. But if you really want to lock that patch onto the garment, you got to do a double press. The patches that we're using today are pretty thin, they're not too thick, and so I think a press from the top is going to be just fine. But if you're dealing with a thicker patch, here's a cool trick. After that first press, let the patch cool down completely, and then turn your garment inside out and press from the inside. Sometimes with a thicker patch, it can be really difficult to get that heat down into the adhesive, but if you go from the back side, you're able to put that heat press right on the adhesive part and get a really good locked in double press. For the second press, I use the same temperature, the exact same time frame, and the exact same pressure. And after that, the garment's good to go. Again, I want to reiterate that the fabric matters. Everything I've told you today as far as heat, temperature, timing, and pressure can change a lot depending on the material you're using. So if you're using the same settings and getting different results every time you press a patch onto a garment, it's probably the fabric change that's messing you up. Like I said earlier, cotton, higher temperature, higher pressure. Polyester, lower temperature, lower pressure. Spandex, even lower. Heat press patches can be tricky. It's not one size fits all. So if you have any questions, if you're using a different material, if you have a different heat press, different patches, leave a comment below, and once you figure it out, you're going to be able to apply these different rules to a ton of other aspects in your print shop and with your heat press. Thanks again for sticking around this long. Subscribe if you want more helpful tips on print shop and print shop processes. Drop a comment below if you need any help. I'm happy to help troubleshoot, and see you in the next one.